listening to CMDA Matters, the weekly podcast of Christian Medical and Dental Associations. Here's your host, Dr. Mike Chubb.
Welcome, friends, to CMDA Matters, where we explore the issues that matter most to Christian healthcare professionals. Whether you're in healthcare, married or otherwise related to a healthcare professional, or simply interested in how God is working through Christ followers in patient care and beyond, we are so glad you're here. On today's episode, we're sharing the recording of a powerful CMDA livestream discussion on retirement, finishing well and finding purpose as you transition from a healthcare career into a fulfilling retirement from a Christian worldview. This conversation features Pastor Bert Jones, who's CMDA's Vice President of Missions and Member Care, and Dr. Steve Sartori, who's founder of CMDA's coaching ministry. Together, these two men explore how you can stay faithful and intentional in this new season of life and finish your race well, inspired by Paul's words to Timothy about keeping the faith. Well, I think we all want to finish strong, but it's not always easy. This discussion is packed with wisdom and encouragement and practical steps for you on how you can approach retirement with purpose and joy. Let's dive into this week's episode.
My name is Pastor Bert Jones, and I'm glad to be joining you tonight. I serve as the Vice President of Missions and Member Care. I want to introduce you to Dr. Steve Sartori. He is a CMDA member, a longtime CMDA member. He's a physician life and leadership coach who helps doctors in several special areas and healthcare professionals align with God, optimize their well-being, and maximize their influence. He's a graduate of the Medical College of Wisconsin. He has been a CEO of a private group practice, chief of staff at 2 hospitals, a faculty member for a family medicine residency program, and chief medical officer for a faith-based community healthcare center. He is also the founder of our CMDA Center for Wellbeing, and he has been my predecessor and my mentor here at CMDA in the area of well-being and coaching. And he's married to his lovely wife, Chris. They have 2 adult girls who are married and has 5 grandchildren. And he enjoys traveling, he loves sports, and he is known as an avid Green Bay Packers fan. Dr. Steve, welcome to the live stream tonight.
Well, thank you, Bert. And when you read all of those things, it kind of makes me feel a little older than maybe I actually am.
Well, Steve, we're excited to jump into the conversation tonight as we begin our time and asking some questions together. One more question we usually ask someone when we're coaching in the coaching process is, why is this focus and why is this outcome so important to you? And this has been a big passion for you, this idea of retirement. I remember when you first, I think maybe we talked about this before when we were in Greece a couple of years ago. Tell me, why is this so important?
Yeah, it's important not only for me because I'm at that stage of life walking through that myself and learning things, but I think it's important for our members because just like all of America and much of the world, we have an aging population, and many people are approaching retirement, thinking about retirement. And so I think when there's a sense of urgency, if you're approaching a time when a decision has to be made or changes are being made to your life or you have important choices to make, it really ramps up the importance. Urgency is a big motivator for that. So I think people see it as a very important thing. They want to redeem the last third of their lives or whatever, however much time God gives them, and they want to make it useful for the kingdom.
It's interesting. We talk to a lot of younger people. We mentor them, coach them about starting strong. When it comes to retirement, you start hearing these phrases, finish well, finish well. What does that mean in a healthcare professional world? What does that mean for Christians in a worldview to finish well in terms of retirement?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Finishing strong, finishing well. If you're running a race, you usually receive or keep something in reserve so that you can finish that race, right? Even with maybe a kick at the finish. And I think for those of us in healthcare, and particularly for those of us who are Christians, I think finishing well means we want to keep the faith. We want to be like Paul when he was writing his letter to Timothy. I've kept the faith. I've finished the race. And now The crown of glory is awaiting me. So I think for Christians, it's hard to finish strong. I mean, I don't know how many people realize it's hard to finish the race well. And I've witnessed many who did not finish the race well, and it hurts my heart, to tell you the truth. And I think as Christians who are surrounded by a body of healthcare professionals who are Christians, we ought to be supporting one another so that we can run the race together. You know, Hebrews 12 says we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, but we have witnesses here. We have witnesses in our own communities, in our own churches that can help us finish strong. So I want everybody to finish strong. I really do, up until their last breath.
Yeah, my heart for our members is not only that they finish well in their professional career, but they end their life well and hear this "well done, good and faithful servant." What do you think the connection is between that when we go to retire and then hearing that "well done, good and faithful servant"?
Yeah, I mean, there's a gap here. You're going to retire, and then you want to hear "well done, good and faithful servant." And, you know, John Wyatt, one of the speakers at our national convention, wrote a book called Finishing Well, or The Final Lap, I think is the title. But he talks about what happens in that last third of life and how the transitions that we make, and things are going to change. And it's very difficult. We're going to make transitions into dependency maybe, or nearing death, and what's going to happen at all those times. And I think if you study finishing well, you know, you have to live well to finish well. Lydia Dugdale at our national convention last year talked about what is it to die well. Well, you got to live well to die well. So what does it mean to live well after work? What does it mean to live well? And I have kind of a little mantra for myself. It's live well, love well, leave well. So I think if you do those things, particularly love well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, love well, live well, and leave well. So yeah, it's an important part of life.
You know, as people look about retirement or something they're excited about, there's oftentimes you get there and people say things like, "It's not really what I expected it to be. I was disappointed in that show," or that, whatever the case may be. That happens in retirement as well. And so what do you think some of the misconceptions are that people have in their minds and expectations? All disappointment is a result of unmet expectation. What are some of the disappointments, misconceptions that people have about retiring?
Yeah, it reminds me of a term called arrival fallacy, right? You think, oh, the grass is greener on the other side, or when I reach retirement, wow, life is going to be great. And so we do have preconceived ideas and beliefs about what retirement should look like for us. And a lot of times it creates disappointment. We think what our life will be like, and it's not like that. There are challenges to retirement. Retirement is a very challenging transition in life. And people who don't prepare well for it sometimes stumble out of the blocks and take a long time to sort of figure it out. So, yeah, it's a very difficult thing. I think people underestimate the amount of stress that they have in retiring. They think, oh, I'm going to a stress-free life, but they're not. If you look at the rating scales for stressful events in life, retirement's in the top 10. It's in the top 10 stressful events in life. And so people who don't prepare for the stress and the associated psychological adaptation that's required to make that change, which is what we call transition, it's a tough road to hoe for them.
Steve, was that the way it was for you? Was it a lot of surprises and what maybe are some of those that were biggest surprises?
There were so many surprises. But the one thing about surprises is God has some really cool surprises in store. When you don't know what's coming, God has some really cool surprises. I mean, that's how I ended up at CMDA, really. I retired from clinical medicine, really not knowing what I was going to do next. I knew I wasn't done working. I knew I wasn't done with my calling. I knew God wasn't done with me yet, but I didn't know what it was. And sure enough, I end up at CMDA talking to Dave Stevens and telling him I didn't want the job he was offering me, and then telling him someday he ought to start a coaching program. And he already had a coaching program. He just needed to ramp it up. And he said, okay, do that. I said, I don't know anything about it. But this kinds of surprises that help you step into an opportunity that you didn't even have on your radar. And I've heard that story from many of our members out there who found something that they didn't even know existed. Didn't expect. Yeah. And it caught them and it surprised them with joy, a lot of joy.
So as we speak about misconceptions about retirement, there's also some theological misconceptions as well. We got several people that ask us. Trish asked us about what does the Bible have to say about retirement. Joe asked a similar question about retirement. There's this idea out there that there's no retirement in the Bible. You look it up in a concordance and there's no such word as retirement and so on and so forth. So help us understand some of what the Bible does say about retirement and the concepts of it.
Yeah, I appreciate the questions because we do want to live according to biblical principles. We trust the Bible. It's authoritative. And the Bible talks about retirement just a little bit. I mean, when you think about the Levites in the Old Testament, at about the age of 50, they were told, you don't have to do the heavy lifting anymore. You're certain parts of your job you don't have to do anymore. Didn't mean they were done with work. They had other kinds of work to do. And you think of old people in the Bible. There's a role for older people. As we age in the church and in the Christian community, there's a role for us. The Bible talks about how older men should mentor younger men, how older women should teach younger women. You look at the appreciation in the temple when Jesus was presented, and you see Simeon and Anna, and you see the old people just so appreciative of what's going on. And I believe there's work for you to do in the church up to the very end of life. If you have breath in you, you can pray. You can sometimes converse with people and have an influence. And I think the things that people want, if you query people about what they want at the end of their life, they want to be loved, they want to love others, and they want to leave some kind of influence or legacy behind, a legacy of influence. So that sometimes includes things we'll get into a little bit later about opportunities for mentoring and things like that.
Yeah, so I think that, I don't think the expectation of the Scripture is that you just stop at a certain age, you hit 50 or 65 here in our settings in our culture, but that it is a place for retirement, to cease from our labor that we've been used to.
Yeah.
But the work that we do for the Lord continues on. And I'm just reminded today, as we're having this conversation, the numbers of ministries here at CMDA, commissions and activities that are filled with people in that age bracket, in that retirement bracket, who are serving the Lord now through the ministries of CMDA and commissions and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one other thing, if I can back up just a minute, Bert. There's one other thing that came to my mind. And, if you read through the Scriptures, there's a big emphasis on the rhythms of work and rest, right? That there is a time for rest. There's a time for everything under heaven. So every 7 years would be like a year of Sabbath, or every 50 years or so there'd be a year of Jubilee. And so I've interviewed several people, many from CMDA, and one or two people said, I looked at that entry into retirement as a year of Jubilee. It was something that, to me, the Scripture spoke that I was to just take a break. Let the land lay fallow. Don't try to rush into anything. So the biblical mantra of work, rest, cycles of work, cycles of rest, I think it really reigns true. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. So for that year of Jubilee, do all of our retired people get to cancel all the debts?
Hey, that'd be wonderful, wouldn't it?
That'd be great.
Everybody says you should enter retirement without any debt.
That's right.
That's common financial advice.
That's true.
Canceled right now.
So, Steve, when we think about general principles, a lot of people are joining us on this podcast and in this live stream are thinking about a transition. They're not ready. It's maybe a couple years down the road. What are some general principles that you can share that you've learned from some of your interviews about what goes on in those transitions to retirement?
Are you talking about the years leading up to retirement, that kind of preparatory time and what to be thinking about? And because a lot of times people don't put enough thought into that. If you talk to retirees and you ask them how much ramp do you need before you retire, many of them would say, I would have liked about 3 to 5 years thinking about it, planning for it. We all know, I think everybody knows about financial planning. Do I have enough money to live the rest of my days? I mean, it's the very common thing, and financial planners thrive on that kind of work. But the reality is the psychological preparation for retirement is far greater in my mind than the financial piece. It's important to have the financial piece in place. But just thinking about it, what is life after retirement going to look like? What am I going to be doing with my time? What might God have in store for me? What should I do right out of the gate? Any stressful event in your life means don't immediately rush into something new. That's usually not wise. So how will I manage a little bit of time off? How will I prepare to structure my day? Because one of the struggles doctors have is the fact that they've been told what to do with every minute of every day. And now, I'm not being told what to do with every minute of the day. I have to be more responsible now. And relationship things. There's so many things to prepare for that you don't think about. But if you have someone walk with you, like a mentor, a coach, a consultant, or whoever, a friend who's been there before you, I could say, Bert, what do you think your marriage is going to be like in retirement? Yeah. What's going to be different? And you start to play in the experimental playground of your mind. And I think the mental work you do ahead of time extremely helpful for when you arrive. My wife accuses me I'm an incredible planner, all right? Planner of trips to the, she says way too much. But the reality is that mental work that I do ahead of time really helps me pull the trigger on things when I get there. So I think people should do a lot of thinking. And sometimes you need a thought partner to help you think about the things you might not be thinking about, or you might not even think about thinking about.
Right. In terms of transition, Keon writes, I'm not sure how to determine whether it's better to continue to work some to have more money to give later, or to quit work altogether and have more time to give. There's a good question.
It's a constant tension for everyone, right? Time and money, the yin and yang. It's a constant challenge for doctors. The more you work, the more you get paid. Mm-hmm. The less time you have at home. And what do we hear from doctors we coach? I've got terrible life balance. I don't have both, because we want people to have good life at work, good life at home. And I think, again, it's an individual decision. The stressors on each person's life are differing. And yes, you want to have a good income, but there's another question I think that came in earlier about, should I make a bunch of money or to give more? Or, we have these tensions of, and I'd like to have both good money and good time. Yeah. And there's a balance point somewhere in there. As one of my friends reminds me, there's a ditch on each side of the road. If you love money, Bible has all kinds of warning about people who love money. If you're lazy, Bible has all kinds of warning about that too, right? So somewhere in the middle is a sweet spot.
I think you're talking about Scott's question. It was talking about is it, if you could only pick one, would you have an extravagant lifestyle or a simple lifestyle, or a big nest egg? What would you choose, the big nest egg or a simple lifestyle?
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. I think both. People try to give you these, which do I want? Well, I want enough. If you look at the writer of Proverbs, what does the writer of Proverbs say? Give me enough. If you give me too much, I might forget about God. If you give me too little, I might be tempted to steal. So I think what you want is the capacity to be generous. Generosity is an incredible, rewarding characteristic, and retirement gives you an even greater opportunity to be generous. On the other hand, living a simple lifestyle and living below your means is also a wonderful way to be more generous. So I think if you're gifted with making money, there's nothing wrong to be gifted with making money. And there's nothing wrong with having a simple lifestyle. And the greater gap you create between money and lifestyle, the greater chance you have to give, right? And for me personally, and for many who I've talked to and interviewed, one of the great joys is a retirement. They've actually been able to ramp up their giving. And the joy that comes from being freed from some of the normative pressures of life financially, it's a blessing. It's a blessing.
So I hear you saying that the answer to Scott's question is that it's really both.
Yeah.
Have as much of a nest egg as you can, because you don't know how long we're going to live on that, but also to make the adjustments for some inexpensive lifestyle.
Before we continue with this week's episode, here's a special announcement for you. Time is running out to register for the 2025 CMDA National Convention in St. Charles, Missouri on May 1st through 4th. Sponsored by Samaritan's Purse, this is the premier event for healthcare professionals, residents, students, and spouses to gather in community together. Our guest speakers include Dr. Eric McLaughlin, Ryan Baumberger, Aaron Hawley, and more. We can't wait to gather together and for God to show us how we can each be a spoke in the wheel for Christ in healthcare. So reserve your spot now. For more information and to register, visit natcon.cmda.org. We're excited to announce the newest addition to CMDA's long list of resources for our members, and it is specifically for students and residents. Called Standing Strong in Training, this new curriculum helps healthcare students and residents stand up against the cultural pressures facing Christians within healthcare today. The curriculum's 7 modules are designed for group settings, allowing attendees to solidify their foundational worldview beliefs regarding important issues, such as the beginning of life, end of life, and biblical sexuality. Each module also offers ideas of how to winsomely defend biblical values and positively interact with others in developing their worldview beliefs. For more information and to download this free resource, visit cmda.org/standingstrong. Let's jump right back into this week's episode.
I think about the idea of flying. We fly a lot in our jobs here. Usually about 10 to 15 minutes out, the stewardesses start getting everyone ready back to their seats, their tray tables up and their seat backs up, collect all the trash. They don't just land automatically. How far out do you recommend someone to start making some of these transitions, in terms of cutting back on the lifestyle and spending and, trying to really prepare for this?
Yeah.
How far out are we on that?
The farther, the better.
Okay.
I mean, I think when you're young, I remember one of my mentors, he would work with medical students, and he would say, start learning to live below your standard of living. Just because you got a student loan, don't spend it all. Don't go out for a $100 meal, which you can get a $5 meal. And so I think you build patterns of financial management that are going to serve you into the future. You build patterns of living well so you live well in retirement. You're always building toward your retirement. God is always preparing you for what lies way down the road. So it's hard to just all of a sudden say, I'm suddenly 3 to 5 years from retirement. Suddenly the plane is going to land all of a sudden and you're rushed into it. You don't want to be rushed into it. You don't want to put your tray table up and you're bouncing on the runway, So I think the longer the better. Most people would say 3 to 5 years as a common way to start thinking more intently about it. The other thing that is a surprise to some people is retirement doesn't always happen on your own terms. Mm-hmm. So you may think your retirement ramp is a certain time frame, and it may not be. Doctors are employees nowadays, right?
Right.
I'm hearing more and more stories, Bert, about doctors getting pink slips, all right? Walking in, going to the CEO's office and saying, we don't need your services anymore. And you think, what? But that's not as rare as it used to be. So you may think you were going to retire at 65, 66, or whatever, and you may be facing a 62-year-old laying off. I mean, it's not common, don't get me wrong, but the way it goes, it may not be. So having buffer and margin is almost always. So if you think 3 to 5 years ahead, you got a little bit of margin. You're not rushed into it.
Yeah. So what are some common challenges associated with retirement? What can people expect as to be some obstacles along the way?
I think we've talked about some of them already, whether it be relationship challenges, shifts there. You lose your collegiality, the people you went to work with all those years, and suddenly you're not seeing them every day. And they were work relationships. They weren't necessarily close, but they were functional relationships. And so those don't carry forward, many of them, most of them probably. So as your social world shrinks a little bit, that's one of the challenges. Who will I develop deep relationships with? Who will I continue relationships with? Who will I start relationships with? That's one of the big challenges, is the relationship factor. The other things that are even greater probably is, who am I and what am I going to do? I mean, who am I now? I've always, when people introduce me, I say, I'm Dr. Sartori, and I'm a family doctor in Corbin, Kentucky. Well, that's not my introduction anymore. My introduction now is I'm Steve Sartori. I work as a leadership coach or whatever. It's different. So your shift in how do I introduce myself? How do I see myself? Who am I? And the reality is if you don't sort some of those things out ahead of time, you're kind of lost with your own identity. So this sense of identity bridging, which is called by one retirement expert, the sense of who am I now? Because if your job is who you are, then when your job is not, are you not? I mean, that's just the way it goes. You are still the same person,
right?
Gifted with God's anointing on you.
I'm reminded of something my mom used to tell me. My mom, we lived in the same town with my mom, last 2 places before she went to be with the Lord. And every time I'd go over there, she'd say something like, Bert, getting old's not for wimps,
Yeah.
And so Marcia asked an interesting question. She said, how does coming to terms with aging and its increased limitations play into the challenges of retirement?
Yeah. The reality is, as I tell people, growing older, it's not good for your health. It just isn't, right? The majority of hospitals are filled up with old people for the most part. And so what happens when we're physically unable to do what we used to be able to do? Because if you live long enough, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. I mean, that's the nature of life. So it's just what happened. What do you do when God puts a constraint or a restraint on your life? What if he blocks the door? What if he says, Steve, you can't walk anymore? What if you say, Steve, you can't, like my father. My father lived to 93, couldn't see, macular degeneration, couldn't see. What do you do when you can't see? Well, he had conversations with his kids. He was a wonderful man. We enjoyed him up to the end. And even though it bothered him tremendously that he couldn't see and he couldn't watch the Green Bay Packers, he was a tremendous conversationalist. Never lost a wit. I mean, smart. So you do what you can do with what you have, and you accept the constraints that God gives you. Some things we control, some things we don't.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do with the things you don't control? I think when you fight against that, I think you embrace your constraints and you say, God, you're in it. Paul had a constraint, didn't he? Didn't he have bad vision,
Right.
I think, probably? He could have kicked against the goads, but he said, you know what? Your power, God, is perfected in my weakness.
Yeah, I think it's important for our members who may be struggling with that to understand that God's not limited by our limitations.
Amen.
And even though we may have a constraint, it doesn't stop God's hand from working through us. And sometimes God uses those constraints as a closed door from something we thought we would be doing in retirement to something God has a different plan. And how many times have you seen there are things you're doing right now, Steve, that you had no idea that you would be doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And how many times, Bert, have you appreciated someone who had a disability or a constraint and their testimony was strong as ever?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost more powerful, really. It's amazing.
I remember I had an aunt that was a great prayer warrior, and she was confined to a bed in many later years of her life, but she didn't let that stop her.
Yeah.
She prayed, and I was on her, Tuesday. She prayed for missionaries on Tuesdays, and I was a missionary, and she prayed for me faithfully as my dad's aunt. And so just she kept busy staying at it.
Yeah, one of the people that wrote in, I think it was a friend of mine, he said, my pastor keeps telling me, you're still breathing. God's not done with you
Right.
yet. Yeah, you're
it's not
still
over.
breathing. God's not done with you yet.
More to your story. Another possible challenge for retired people is you got people getting ready to go into retirement who have aging parents. You've got people moving into retirement that maybe have kids who've gone through difficulties, challenges of life, and they're moving back home in these retirement years. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's a challenging season of life because as people live longer and longer, we're commonly caught in this sandwich, right? You might have parents. I still have a mother living, and she tells me, you can't keep getting older, son, because it makes me feel so much older.
Yeah.
But we do get stuck in that because you're aging parents, and what is your responsibility? To take care of widows, to take care of the aging, right? And then you have your kids down here who need your help, and they want you to go live by them because they got grandkids, and they want free babysitting, or they want you to be there.
Right.
And you can't be both places at once because typically your mother and father are here, your kids are over here, and that's where I'm stuck. I'm in Kentucky, parents and family in Wisconsin, grandkids in Africa, grandkids in Alabama. And so you're going to have to sort that out about how you can effectively minister and serve the people in your life because you're the only family member that is the family member. And there's a lot of things you can do, but if you don't take care of your own family, you're worse than an infidel. I think you have a responsibility to do what you can to take care of the people in your family. So
My mentor told me for years, all disappointment is a result of unmet expectations.
yeah.
And so I think, the thing I hear that I want to challenge the people who are listening is that if you go into this thinking there are no challenges, this is going to be a piece of cake, and we're going to land this plane really quick, sometimes those landings can be pretty bumpy.
Now,
And,
Bert, are we giving them the wrong message out there that
just
this
trying
is
to
going to
be-
be a lot worse than they think? And I
just trying to
mean,
help
cheer
out.
up, it's going to be worse than you think.
Yeah.
I hope we paint them a positive picture because
Well-
I want them to walk away with some hope and expectation. And really, and it can be
It is.
one of the best phases of life.
But one of the
really.
greatest sales pitches Jesus gave to being a disciple is that it's been granted to you not only to believe but to suffer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are some challenges.
There are.
Right? So if we
Yeah.
don't know that could be challenging as well. I want to go back to
Yeah.
something you talked about just a little bit ago. I think it was such an important concept. I want to make sure everyone got it. Was this idea about maintaining a sense of identity. You talked about how many times their identity. I hear people who are no longer practicing in their medical profession. They're no longer called doctor in this. They're just destroyed and distraught. Talk to us about identity.
Yeah, it's a deep topic. I think if you look at worldview and things and what's important to people, they ask themselves 4 questions. Where did I come from? Who am I? What am I here for, and where am I going when it's all done? Those are the 4 big questions. Identity and purpose are in the middle of that. Most Christians figure out, where did I come from and where am I going? But what about this messy middle I'm living in right now? Who am I? And what am I on the planet to do? What does God have for me to do? Or as one of my mentors would have said, what did God have in mind when he made you? And so we have to understand that our identity is not our role. A role is not an identity. Now, we sometimes equate it. So if someone says, who are you? I'm a doctor? Well, no. Who are you really? Apart from your role, who are you? So we have to understand that we are a child of God, first and foremost. We are loved. We are beloved before we did a thing. We didn't do anything. So because you're a doctor, so what? And when it's all said and done and on your deathbed or whatever, are people going to care? No. Do your grandkids care that you're a pastor or a bigwig or anything? No, they don't care. They just care you're their grandpa. So I think there's this sense of understanding, who did God make us to be? What am I called to do? What are the passions I have in life? What are the giftings I have in life? And when your giftings and your passions and your desires of your heart align with what God had in mind when he made you, guess what? There will be work to do that uses all of that in an application for the kingdom of God. So our identity is multifactored. It's not only a role. One of my mentors said, is what you do determine who you are, or does who you are determine what you do? And I remember one of my dear friends, he said, I didn't know what to do because I didn't know who I am, which is so true. We have to know who we are.
Yeah.
We have limits. We have to know that. There are some things, Bert, you're just not equipped to do. Nothing personal, but
Right.
you're just
It's
not
true.
equipped to do. And there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm not equipped to do. So do the things that God has equipped you to do.
You mentioned my grandkids. I have learned so much about my identity by the love that my grandkids have for us. I talk about in my bio. People want to know kind of what you did, what you've done, who you are, what your title is. But at the bottom, I put something that says my favorite title is Papa. And,
Yeah.
And what I've learned is we can all get sucked into that kind of idea. I'm a VP, or how many books we've written, or how many places we've preached, or how many countries we've been to around the world. But when I walk in to see my grandkids, this weekend, they don't care how many books I've written. They don't care. They call out, run toward me and say, Papa.
Yeah.
And they love me. And I that's helped me understand God's love for me as an individual. He sees me, he loves me, and it's not what I've done for him. It's what he's done in my life and what he's doing in my life. And it's just a big help, I think, in the identity role.
Yeah, I think, Arthur Brooks addresses it in his book From Strength to Strength about the fact that we're moving in life from resume virtues to eulogy virtues. What's really important when you're on your deathbed to be said about you? Do you want to be said, oh, he was a VP of mission? No. They want to know the characteristic, man of integrity, an honest person, a generous person, loved his grandkids, loved his wife, loved his, that's the true identity, because we come without anything.
Right.
We leave without anything except that legacy of what we've
And we talked about these transitions that take place and need to take place sometimes maybe 3-5 years out of the way before we land the plane. Maybe that's something that's a reminder God's challenging each of us right now. Like, drop the titles. Don't be your whole identity wrapped up in what you do, because someday that's going to be different.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
be a child of God.
Yes. I mean, there are people who still address me as doctor, especially the kids of our friends growing up, because they always knew me as doctor. And there are patients I see out in the public, former patients, and they still call me doctor or doc. And I don't correct them. I don't make a big deal about it. When I introduce myself, I don't introduce myself as doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I just introduce myself as Steve. And so each person's different, how long you hold on to that. Because I think one of the questions that comes for retirees is, what do I do with my profession? Okay, if I stop working the way I've used to be working, can I still use my MD degree, DO degree, nurse practitioner degree? That's a question I think someone may have even asked.
Right.
Is that sense of, what do I do? Are my skills suddenly gone? No, your skills aren't suddenly gone. I still think like a doctor. When I hear stories, I'm making a differential diagnosis. And so the reality is we still have skills, and those skills are applicable in a variety of arenas. You'll have important decisions to make. Will I stay board certified? Will I keep my license? Will I keep my DEA? What memberships will I continue? How will I drop? So there's a progression of things when you pre-think retirement of what am I going to do with all of these things? So they're all expenses that were paid by your business typically. And one thing I heard from the membership people is a lot of people drop their membership at CMDA when they retire. And I think, well, that ought not be.
Right.
This is one of the most important cohorts you have as people of Christian faith. We're going to walk through retirement with you, and they're going to stick with you.
So how does faith play a role in retirement? I mean, there are people retiring who have no faith, but how does strong faith in Christ be a positive factor in people who are taking the step of retirement?
I think when you have a kingdom mindset, it really changes your whole perspective. You begin to think, how can I serve people? How can I glorify God in this last phase of life? So you're looking for opportunities to use the confidence you have in your salvation. It might be mentoring people in the church, discipling people. It might be serving as a role in the church. You might have more time to do what you never had time to do before. Someone asked you to teach a class. Well, I don't have time to do that. Someone asked you to preach on a Sunday. Well, I don't have time to do that. Now, I've had the privilege of doing a little bit more of that, of mentoring a young man in our church, of speaking at our church. And so those kinds of opportunities that now you always had to say no to because you had no choice, now you have some choices, and your faith informs that. And I think some of your discipleship opportunities will actually grow in this kind of thing. And your faith continues to remind you. I think one thing that happens, it's a blessing of retirement, is the time you have. I take my time in the morning with my devotions, Bert. I used to have to get out the door at a certain time. I didn't have a choice. I had to be at work. And if I want to linger for an hour or two, I can. And
Steve, just a final prescription for everyone that's listening tonight. What would you say to them?
I would say what I say to myself: love well, live well, and leave well. I would say build those relationships that are going to serve you into retirement. Live now the way you hope to live in the future, and prepare yourself for a legacy and make an influence in the lives of other people. And I think, if you pay attention to those things, you will have a very fulfilling life and enjoy life, even in spite of the maladies of aging and those kinds of things. So I wish for everyone out there an incredibly rewarding, fulfilling retirement. It's been a good ride for me.
Steve, thank you so much. I can't tell you what an impact and influence you've had in my life, and how grateful I am for your leadership and the vision you had for the Center for Wellbeing. And it's you've been big shoes to fill, but thank you for your impact on CMDA.
Thanks, Bert. It's been fun to be here.
This conversation by Pastor Bert Jones and Dr. Steve Sartori was so helpful to me because I've started thinking about and talking with my wife, Pam, about what our retirement might look like. I have med school classmates who've recently retired, and so naturally, it's on my radar more than ever. I love that comment by Steve, moving from resume virtues to eulogy virtues. Wow, does that not capture the concept of finishing well or what? Their insights on finishing the race well and keeping the faith are a beautiful and hopeful reminder of how God, He continues to work through us even beyond our professional careers. You just now heard about half of Bert and Steve's conversation that included responses to some great questions from those who got to hear this session live. Our digital media team captured this timely conversation on video, and it's now available on our website. If you would like to hear and see the entire conversation, just go to cmda.org/retirement. If you'd like to learn more about CMDA's coaching ministry or to find resources that will help you navigate this transition, be sure to visit cmda.org/coaching. And if you enjoyed this episode today, please don't forget to follow CMDA Matters on socials. Also, subscribe to the podcast and share it with others who would be encouraged by these kinds of conversations. From May 1st through the 4th in St. Charles, Missouri, more than 1,000 Christian healthcare professionals will come together to enjoy heartfelt community, to sharpen their understanding of cultural challenges, and to stand strong for biblical truth. Thanks to the generous support of our premier sponsors, Samaritan's Purse and Liberty University College of Osteopathic Medicine, we have an incredible lineup of speakers waiting for you. You can check them out on our website. You don't want to miss this opportunity to be inspired and equipped, friends. So register now by going to natcon.cmda.org. And you will be able to help make this the best attended CMDA National Convention ever. If you're a first-time attendee, we're going to give you $100 off your registration fee. This year's convention also marks the 8th annual CMDA VIE poster session. It's a unique opportunity for students and residents in particular to present scholarly work and receive academic mentorship within the CMDA ranks. We've received more submissions than ever before, with what we hope will be the highest number of posters ever presented at CMDA's National Convention in St. Charles, Missouri. Several years ago, a small group of residents developed the idea of including a poster session at CMDA's convention in order to encourage more students and residents to attend. And it, friends, has been working these last few years. We've seen a growing number of students and residents join us each year, and we're hoping for another record turnout this year. Be sure to stop by the poster session in the Student Resident Lounge while you are attending the convention and interact with the future generation of healthcare professionals. Next week, we have another great episode for you. Pastor Bert Jones, our Vice President of Missions and Member Care, whom you heard today with Steve Sartori, will be co-hosting with me as we interview Mr. Nick Stumbo from Pure Desire Ministries. This is a ministry dedicated to helping people break free from pornography addiction, to rebuild their relationships, and to reclaim their lives. So be sure to tune in. Bringing the hope and healing of Christ to our world. That's what matters to CMDA. And CMDA matters. May you recognize this week that the Lord, He is with you and He is for you to do His good work. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time, Lord willing, on CMDA Matters.
Thanks for listening to CMDA Matters. If you would like to suggest a future guest or share a comment with us, please email cmdamatters@cmda.org. And if you like the podcast, be sure to give us a 5-star rating and share it on your favorite social media platform. This podcast has been a production of Christian Medical and Dental Associations. The opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are not necessarily endorsed by Christian Medical and Dental Associations. CMDA is a nonpartisan organization that does not endorse political parties or candidates for public office. The views expressed on this podcast reflect judgments regarding principles and values held by CMDA and its members, and are not intended to imply endorsement of any political party or candidate.